Welcome to the first ever 1455 Summer Literary Festival. Isn't this fantastic, City of Winchester? Many thanks to Sean Murphy, the founder and director of 1455, the City of Winchester, the board of directors of this new fantastic literary arts nonprofit. Couldn't be prouder to be part of this first ever festival. My name is Gregg Wilhelm. I am the founder and director emeritus of CityLit Project, which is a sort of sister organization to 1455 up in Baltimore, Maryland. I am still publisher of their CityLit Press imprint, and I am currently the director of the creative writing program at George Mason University in Fairfax. So it's a BFA and an MFA program there. And we're here today to talk about the state of the industry, trends in publishing, and I often do this kind of panel, and when I begin, the audience tends to have this sense of doom and dire and gloom, right? So the state of publishing can't be good, but I actually am always energized and enthusiastic about discussing this topic. And I couldn't be more honored to share the platform with my three distinguished colleagues. To my immediate left is Richard Peabody. He is the founder and publisher of Gargoyle Magazine and Paycock Press. He has spent many, many years in the publishing business and has seen the trends come and go, even the trend with his broken left arm, which I hope goes soonly. Next is Dallas Hudgens. He is the founder of Relegation Books, based out of DC, and the author of Wake Up, We're Here. And then finally, Paula Whyman. She is the founding editor of Scoundrel Time, which is an online journal of the arts and resistance. And she's also the author of You May See a Stranger, which is the 2017 winner of the Towson Prize for Literature. And I guess it should also be noted that the four of us also either participated in, attended, and or taught in MFA programs. So we sort of see it, so we run our own independent literary presses or online journals. So we talk about editorial trends, marketing trends, but we also have this background in academia, which is often closely associated with not only producing writers, but producing publications as well. So I wanted to kick, and basically we'll talk for about 40 minutes or so, 45 minutes, and also allow plenty of time for Q&A. So we can address some of your questions and thoughts as well. So I thought we'd kick the conversation off with sort of a general question, starting with Paula, working our way back. During the course of your career in publishing and or as a writer and an author, what's been the biggest, most significant change that you've experienced in your career? And I guess maybe we should pass this along.
Thank you. I started in magazine publishing in the production department when there was still pay stub. So there's been a lot of change. And I'm sure we'll talk about technology, but one of the biggest changes for me is the amount of work writers are expected to do that isn't directly involved in actual writing. Now, before you can get a book published, you have to be present on social media. When you find a publisher, you have to do a lot of promoting yourself that maybe used to be done by publishers, and some of this is writing articles that you don't get paid for, you get paid a little bit for, and that can start months before your book comes out and go on for months after your book comes out. So I would say that is overall a negative, but on the other hand, it also means that authors have some more control over how much of an audience they get for their book, as opposed to being subject to whatever your publisher decides they're going to spend on your particular project and how much time they can put into it. So that's my big thing. Too much time spent not writing, and already writers have always been hard up for money, and now we've always had to have other jobs, or most people have always had to have other jobs in order to support the writing and allow them a little bit of time. So now all of those things that writers have to do takes away from their writing time. It's not going to take away from their paying job time, probably.
To follow up, I agree with what you said about so much being expected of writers. And I came into publishing as a writer in 2005 in kind of a more traditional world and publisher. And so what changed from the time my first book was published in 2005 until my publisher passed on their option for my third book was that there was more opportunity to take control and actually publish your own work if you wanted to, with print on demand and ebooks. So I went in that direction. I was a little hesitant. I'd always admired musicians growing up with the do-it-yourself approach, but that didn't seem quite as accepted in writing. You were expected to go past the gatekeepers. So I went that way and had a good experience, and from there I decided to keep the publishing company that I had started going, and was hoping to work with writers who had also maybe fallen through the cracks in the traditional publishing world.
Excuse me, before we go any further, could you guys put your names up there?
Oh.
Thank you so much.
Take the rest of the time trying to get my name.
Thank you.
Well, I go back further than Paula and Dallas. I go back to the days of Mimeo publishing. And the Mimeo machines became available to writers and people publishing their own zines because the offset printers were created. And then there was as computers came in, then the offset machines became available. So everyone started doing offset. And I go back to that era where there were a zillion magazines. And now we live in a time where even the bigs, like Tin House, have just done their last print issue and are going to go online only. And you have other university magazines that have done the same thing. And you always hear when we talk about the future of publishing, everyone's always talking about, well, you know, ebooks is the future, print is over. And it's ridiculous. I mean, if you're anything like I am, I read signs, I read menus, I read everything. I mean, I'm going to read ebooks, I'm going to read regular books. It doesn't matter to me. I don't know why it's a big deal to everybody. And it's so American. We're one way or the other, right? It's like, oh, I only read ebooks. You know, screw you. You got a print book. You're just like, what? And then we have this opportunity now to have so many titles out. It's scary. When I started in this business, I thought Thomas Jefferson read every book that had ever been written. That's what I want to do. I want to read every book that's ever been written. And there's something like 80,000 books written every single day and published. So that's what you're up against. That's the bad end of things. But then again, part of it is writing, part of it is the doing. And that's where I positioned myself. I mean, I'm not just writing, but I'm editing a literary magazine, discovering other people who are writing, and it all feeds on itself, and the imagination feeds each other. I think it's great. I think that the future, in terms of the hard work part of it, sucks, and always has. And when I go to these sorts of events now, all I ever hear anybody talk about is money. And I was at an event not too long ago where people were talking, somebody turned down a reading at a DC university that offered $5,000 for the gig, and that wasn't enough. And I went, well, I'll read. You know, I'll take two. You know, so it's funny to me that people are like, it's, you know, where's, you know, it's about the bread. You know, but yeah, no, I think it's a great time to be a writer. I think it's a great time to be in publishing. I think it's great. You're not going to make $1 million. You know, that's only Stephen King. But it's, you know, it's tough. I think it's great, and more, you know, let 1,000 flowers bloom.
Yeah, I spent my
Just
first.
kicked my drink
Oh,
over.
I was destined to get your iced tea.
Yeah,
I was
no, it's
talking-
just-
I started my career in book publishing at Johns Hopkins University Press, and I guess by now I've published upwards of 300 titles. First 12 years in book publishing, but then there was 8 years between a gap in my career where I didn't publish books to when I restarted. And the number one reason why I was able to restart is simply technology. It totally changed the business plan and the model of publishing that I operated by. Just to give you a brief perspective, back in the day, Richard can relate to this, we would have to manufacture roughly 5,000 copies of a book to make the unit price economical enough to have a decent retail price and have discounts to the trade and whatnot. So you really had to make sure you made really good editorial decisions, which we often tried to do, of course. But if those 5,000 copies sold, I was over the moon. I was terrific. I would want to work with you again, that kind of thing. Whereas the same sort of 5,000 copies sold by what we now call traditional or legacy publishers in New York, it might be very, very difficult to get a second contract. So now basically we manufacture books print on demand. It's the contract between me and the author is pretty much the same contract that I swiped from Johns Hopkins University Press 25 years ago. The royalty terms are even actually better than they were back then. But when it comes to the manufacturing process, we're doing, we can print 1 book at a time, 100 books at a time, or 1,000 books at a time. And typically my first runs are going to be like 250, because I'm going to send a lot of free copies. I give a lot of free copies to the author, him or herself, but then I use a lot of free copies for marketing, right, to get the marketing ball rolling. So it's a completely different model that makes it possible at all to consider publishing in today's environment. But here's the cool editorial thing. 15 years ago, I would have really thought twice before I would have agreed to publish fiction, let alone poetry. And now I'm over the moon to be able to publish fiction and poetry that I really believe in, because I don't have to lose sleep at night with 5,000 copies of a book on a pallet somewhere else, praying to the literary gods that I've made the right editorial decision. These are important books to me, and I think in general, what you find in going the independent press route is that you will find passionate publishers, and passionate editors. Not that you won't find that in New York houses, you will, but we publish books that we believe in, and by authors who we believe in. And that's, it's sort of a matter of what kind of experience do you want to have? Do you want to have that, one author of the 300 authors that one imprint from Random House will publish in any given season and be part of that large sort of scene? Or do you want sort of a more intimate, passionate experience? Because at the end of the day, as Richard says, you're not even going to make a lot of money. So it's sort of like writing itself. It's the process. So what kind of experience do you want to have? I used to have this grid that I would show students called the Publishing Matrix, and it would sort of detail the various avenues any kind of writer can get to be published, to have a product in their hand. Big, large houses, independent presses, university presses, do-it-yourself, self-publishing, things like that. And you would compare these various avenues toward publishing by the business model, the kind of contract terms, which way the money was flowing, if it was going from you to some sort of service provider or from the publisher to you, your role, how much input you might have in the way the book is edited and designed. Titles are not yours. Titles are publishers. They're marketing things, right? But you might have, but I don't want an author who's going to cringe every time that she goes out to promote her book with a title that she doesn't like, right? So it's a very collaborative process. But the joke of the Publishing Matrix was the final column. Who's responsible for marketing? And no matter what avenue you selected or opted for to get published, the last column was the same. Who's responsible for marketing? You are. So by far, it's technology, and that's really made it possible for things like CityLit Press and Mason's own Stillhouse Press and things like Relegation and everything that we do here possible. But that's the exciting part of it. Talked about money a little bit, and I don't want to harp on this issue so much, but sort of, you can't lose your shirt in this business. You got to figure out some way to remain sustainable. Well, in Richard's case, he's lost an entire wardrobe, but what are some of the sort of pieces of advice you might give someone, whether they're looking to self-publish or you, like, through these various online vendors that are out there now, to be a real money suck, or looking at contract terms if you get published by an independent press? What sort of what financial words of wisdom may you have for the aspiring authors and writers here in the crowd? We'll start with Richard and work our way back up.
There's a great story about Pat Conroy. When he wrote his first novel, The Boo, he self-published it. And then when it came time for the next novel, a publisher actually approached him and said, we'd like to do your next book. And they said, how does $10,000 sound? And he went, oh man, I don't know if I can come up with $10,000. And they said, no, Pat, we pay you. Which is nice. But that $10,000 is the same money they gave Fitzgerald in the 20s. And writers generally don't get any more than that today, if you're lucky. Anyway. I don't do any of this for the money. I'm weird that way. Maybe that's just, white privilege, I don't know. I do this because it's my passion. And if it was about making money, and God knows, whenever anyone comes to me and says, I'm going to start a literary magazine, and I go, what are you, out of your mind? And they go, no, but I got to break even. And I just, oh, okay. Because they're not going anywhere. They'll do 1 or 2 issues and it's over. Because literary magazines don't make money. Never have. If they did, every publishing house would have a literary magazine. And that's your bar. Universities are dropping their magazines, or they're going online only. And that's reality again. So what I do is try to provide an outlet for short story collections, because that's a tough sell, and poetry, because that's a tough sell. And you want to get the people out there. I think that's the great thing about all this, is that we are a tribe, and we kind of help each other, and I don't see it as a competition. Sure, we all get a little green sometimes when somebody does ridiculously well. You're like, how did that happen? But that's just like soap opera stuff. Those two are together? Why? Anyway. And I do it because it's fun. If it's not fun, do something else. That's my advice.
I think it's important to be flexible with your definition of success as a writer now. It's great to have big goals, but maintain some flexibility. Things can go really well. You can sign with a large publisher. You can have a hit. You can sign with a small publisher. Maybe you don't make as much money. Maybe you don't have as many readers. But it's what is the definition of success for you to have a book out into the world? Is it any less important if you write something that touches 500 lives or 100,000? And I think that's just goes back to it having to be important to you, for art's sake, not just money or ego.
Since, Greg, you asked about contract terms, one thing I would really advise you to do is join the Authors Guild. They have free legal advice for members, and I've asked them to look at contracts before, and they're very knowledgeable. And specifically about contracts, retain your dramatic rights, if at all possible. But regarding small presses and university presses, there's a huge opportunity there, and I just want to reiterate what a couple people have already said. Don't feel like you have to hold out for a major publishing house or your other option is to self-publish. I discourage people from self-publishing because I think, at least with a small press and a university press, you do have a quality stamp and you have support. You have a group of people who are already in love with your book because they wouldn't put it out there if they weren't. They're doing it only for that reason. They're not really making a bottom line decision. My book was published by Northwestern University Press. I had a fantastic experience with my editor there, and I would do it again. I did still have to do a lot of my own publicity work, but that's how it works everywhere. I have friends who published with the big publishing houses, and it was exactly the same. And I was able to look good by selling, the amount of books that for a big publisher would not have looked good. But for a university press, they were thrilled. So then when it's time to go find a publisher for my next book, I'll be in a much better position than I would be if I had disappointed a major publishing house with my sales. And that seems so non-artistic to talk about, but I know we're not going to make a lot of money, but I do want my work to be published, and I want it to be published by a place that has a good reputation, that is respected, and that will get it out there somehow. Even so, no one mentioned reviews yet, but the shrinking of the critical review environment is really unfortunate. But that said, the one way that small presses and university presses can get attention is, I think they're getting more reviews, maybe not in the New York Times, but in other places that matter.
Well, why don't we, I'm going to ask this question because I'm just going to riff off something you just said so we can start work with Paula again and work our way back down. And that's the question of, sort of kind of goes hand in hand with reviews and the craft side of our work, of being a writer, audience. Knowing your audience, knowing who your reader is. And by that, I've just been reading something, because that often gives you the impression of pandering to your readership and not writing what you want to write. But how important it is to really know your audience and who you're writing for, in the sense of then that directing you toward the right kind of publisher for that work.
Well, in my case, I write literary fiction, so I'm going to look for a publisher who focuses on that and who has a built-in audience for that kind of work. And specifically, my book is linked short stories. So already that makes me far less likely to be publishing with a big publishing house. But there are great opportunities with small presses and university presses who are taking up the slack and filling those gaps with more adventurous, riskier work, more experimental work, or even work by people who did really well critically with a book at a major publishing house, and then their second or third book doesn't sell to one of those publishing houses. The university presses, the small presses are great outlets for those kinds of books.
That's a great point. Don't neglect looking at university presses, because what's happened in that world over the last 25 years is they've become more and more trade-oriented to stay alive. And as their subsidies from their own parent institutions have dwindled, and their whole sort of platform and environment and ecosystem has changed dramatically. So they're more and more willing. I think of like a Nebraska, University of Nebraska Press has a great Bison Books, a great trade paperback imprint, things of that nature. So don't discount university presses when you're looking around.
When we promote a new book, we also try to work in at least part of the time to promote our other books in our catalog along with that, thinking that they're a family, that they're related, that if you like one of our books, you would like the others. Of course, we don't publish a lot of books, but that has worked. That has helped. We try to do events with you know, with an author who may have published a book this year, and then one of our authors who published a book a couple of years ago. So we try to, you know, we try to keep a book alive longer than 6 weeks, at least in terms of promotion. That initial push, we try to go at least several months out, even if things don't go well right out of the gate. We keep pushing and looking for, you know, somebody online who could become a champion of the book or the book group. And that actually happened with one of our books. It kind of saw a second life after it had been out about 3 months and wasn't doing anything.
So you were talking about reviews, and one of the things that's kept reviewing alive is various blogs and websites, and that's what everyone's trying to get a review now. And then the writers are all hustling and going, well, you read my book. You know, you just seek someone in the audience, go, you read my book. Put up something on Amazon. You know, everyone's doing that too, and Goodreads. Indie publishers keep your book alive a lot longer. The mainstream bookstore, again, a dying sort of dinosaur. Though we're having a sort of a renaissance of independent bookstores in Washington alone. There's about 4 or 5 new ones now. And everyone's being more selective about what they're selling. One of the other things about indie books is not only do we keep your book alive, you could say in the cover pretty often. In the bigs, I mean, I had a conversation with Mary Goodskill once about one of her collections of short stories where it just had a big screw on the cover, close-up of the screw. And she was going, who got screwed, huh? You know, with the book. And the paperback cover was great because she had input on it. So you never know what's going to happen with the bigs. And with indie presses, we're open. You know, if you have an artist or a friend who can come up with something that we like, yeah, we'll go with that. That's cool. It's also wide open in terms of the idea of hybrid writing. You said experimental, and one of the best things that's happening now, in my opinion, is these genre writing, which has been sort of kicked to the sidelines by the literary fiction world, is coming back in all kinds of mutations of, you know, noir, sci-fi, you know, adolescent book, you know, that kind of thing. It's just wild stuff going on out there. And so there are new things happening, and people are having a lot of fun with it.
Paula could probably address this better than I could, but being published originally and only online has changed. The way the reception of publishing online has totally changed. So my next question is going to be, what one thing would you advise the writers in the audience to do today to prepare for their futures as published authors? And one of those things would be, you know, you're building up your credentials. And today, I think, unlike in the not so far past, having online credentials is substantive and not necessarily, it used to be like, nah, we're not going to consider that. So start building your credentials is one thing. One thing to do today for your career as an author tomorrow.
Oh, we get into the literary citizenship part?
Oh, I was going to mention that, yeah.
Yeah, so like start a reading series somewhere in your town. Call up some authors and have them come read. Not just people you know, people you don't know. And I think this whole thing feeds on itself, in that, you know, the more people you meet in this business, the more kind of, you know, it's like that old commercial, you tell 2 friends and they tell 2 friends.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's important in this biz, just to keep each other sane, and also for the sharing of information. And I think, I know we all go to the Associated Writing Program convention every year. I didn't go in the early days because I just couldn't afford it. But since I've been going steadily for about 15 years now, I regret that I didn't go when I was younger. It is a sharing of information, and you really do get like 15,000 introverts into the same space for 4 days, where you're sitting there going, you know, and trying to talk to everybody until you overload. But the great thing about it is they're introverts too. All those people, and we're all pretending to be, hi, I've got a new book, you know. And that hurt. actually. So yeah, I mean, I think it is kind of it's a sharing of information. It's, how did you do that? Who do you know? And I think we do help each other. I think that's the best part of it.
Where was that you said you went?
Associated Writing Program. This coming year I think it's March, it'll be in San Antonio. And then the one after that is in St. Louis, and the one after that is in Philly. It's the next 3 years.
Yeah, I also think community is very important with other writers, whether you just, you have a writing group of friends that you get together with and you share notes and encourage one another. I've always been interested in the idea of a group of writers forming a collaborative effort to publish each other. I thought with print on demand, ebooks, that might offer more of an opportunity for people to support one another's projects. And also, any way you can, you can reach out and get to know independent booksellers, I think is important. They're really nice people. I think I sometimes feel like everything good that happened to me when I was a writer was the result of the support, kindness of independent booksellers.
Let's see. I would say, first of all, do try to publish your work online. There are so many literary journals now that are very open to emerging writers. I publish Scoundrel Time, which has a particular theme. Definitely make sure that you find out whether your work is appropriate for a particular outlet before you send it. But we publish emerging writers and we publish established award-winning writers, and many of the works that we publish, or many of the writers we publish, go on to publish books of poetry or fiction, essays. And just recently, Peg Purcell published a book that some of the stories had appeared in our journal. I think Reginald Betts published some poems with us that are in one of his books. So it happens over and over again, and the literary journals are really good sort of foundation and proving ground. And in terms of networking, look for places like this. There are so many more writing communities and arts communities now in every town and every city. Form a book group, form a writing group. I've been in 2 different writing groups, and they both grew out of the MFA program I came out of. So if you have that opportunity, that helps also. But it doesn't. You don't have to get an MFA to meet other writers. Go to where the writers are. A lot of bookstores now have classes and groups, and these are all good sources of networking.
Yeah, well, the good news is that the independent bookstores are kind of bouncing back a little bit. It's not nearly as robust as it was 25 years ago, but it's nice to see that bouncing back as well. And that's a great place. That's often the hub of your literary community there in your town. And I would just echo what everybody said about, you don't necessarily have to start a community, but at least support the current one you have. I can't tell you how many times new authors have come up to me with their brand new book under their arm, asking to be, reading at a festival that I'm coordinating, and I was like, I don't know who you are. I've never seen you sort of be part of the community. So, and certainly, if you had maybe done a little bit of homework, you know that we plan far out in advance. So it's not it's not the day of with your book under your arm that you should be asking me. It should be 8 months ago, right? So just be supportive of the community, because like everyone said, what happens is that love will come back to you, right? I do see the sort of title of this session being Trends in Publishing, and that's always a little bit troubling in the sense that who the hell knows, and it'll be different tomorrow anyway. And it also, I think, getting back to the audience question I had, I think it's important that you write what you believe you've been compelled to write, because so much of the hard process is sitting alone, doing the work, that if you're not enjoying that, then getting published is really not even the end of the road, right? It's not even the objective. So don't worry so much about trends. I mean, obviously now, politics and society and cultural things always drive a lot of what's being published or what agents are looking for. But, just sort of go to the books that you admire, the writers that you admire, see who their agents are, find out, and start that relationship. I think it's another thing you could do today that to prepare for your future is just introduce yourself. You don't want to be a nag to an agent until you've got the whole 300-page manuscripts ready to go, right? But there's nothing that says you can't introduce yourself and start developing those relationships with agents, if indeed the services of a literary agent, which I highly promote and approve and endorse, depending on what kind of publishing experience you want to have, what we talked about earlier. Agents are fabulous, and people often they get bad raps, and people were like, "You took 15% of my royalties." And I said, that's going to be the best 15% of anything you ever spend, because that agent's going to help you navigate the terms of the contract, and be your advocate if things with the publisher go wonky. You don't want to have that fight. You want your agent to have that fight for you on your behalf. And so coming to things like this, so everyone in this room is ahead of the game because you come to things like this. So I applaud you for that. Looks like we have about 15 minutes left, so I think why don't we just sort of start opening up to some questions from the audience? Does anybody have a question? I'll try to repeat it so everybody hears. Yes.
You just talked about literary agents. For someone starting out, how do you make that initial contact or find the right person and things of that nature? And also, when it comes to independent publishers, do you also prefer to be approached by an agent or by the author themselves, or where does that stand with independent publishers?
Okay, Richard.
Oh, in the indie world, you don't need an agent
Okay.
for the most part. I mean, I'm sure there are exceptions, but again, it depends on what you're writing as well. I mean, most agents aren't going to represent a book of poems. That's a hard sell. So the indie world is your go-to. Short story is the same. You almost have to have a novel. And if it's nonfiction, you can write a proposal to approach an agent or a publishing house. But if it's fiction, they expect a finished manuscript.
Yeah, the last two books that we published were direct email queries from the authors. They both were experienced authors and had agents, but they just reached out with a personal email, and so it's not necessary. I suppose maybe with a larger publisher, it would help to have an agent. The way I found my agent goes back to the question of community, having a writing group and friends. I was just writing and sharing stuff with my friends in my writing group, and one of them passed it on something I'd written to someone who then got it into the hands of an agent, and that's how it happened for me. Otherwise, I would have been at a loss for how to do that, except to just send something in and have it sit in a pile somewhere. So again, I think community can help. Meeting people, being as Gregg said, helping others, and it comes back.
I do have an agent, and it was very helpful to have an agent negotiate my contract with the University Press. And I would prefer to do it that way if at all possible, because then there's this wall between the business side that you don't have to deal with. Your agent is having the contentious conversations, and you can maintain this great relationship with your editor and the PR people. And so I really prefer that. And to echo what was already said, I met my agent when I took a workshop he was teaching at a literary conference, and I didn't even know he wanted to be an agent. It was kind of a weird thing. He was historically an editor with a big publishing house, and he offered to represent my book, which it doesn't usually happen that way. But the other way, because I had another agent before that, who I found when I was in an anthology with somebody else who was represented by her. So when I was ready with the book, I wrote to her and said, oh, hey, I was in this anthology with so-and-so, and I wondered if you're interested in reading my manuscript. And yeah, she took me on. She didn't sell my book. So it was the next book that got sold. The University Press, so I do think it's helpful to have an agent, and also the way I met my editor was at a workshop. So while my book was out on submission, I went to the Swanee Writers Conference, and that's where I met the person who became my editor. Things happen serendipitously.
I met mine at a party.
Another question.
I don't often hear in trends of publishing the idea of still going out and doing library talks. That's how I promoted my two books, and I did over 170 book talks altogether, and some of those libraries were packed. I love that one-on-one eye contact with my audience because I can read them. We talk about knowing your audience, and that is like the best way of having direct interaction with your audience. What do you all think about that?
I think that's great. Between the writers groups, in different towns where they will bring you in to talk to the group, and the libraries, and then the other thing that's happening now is the writers beginning to imitate the singer-songwriters and doing house readings where they travel around the United States going from, if you can guarantee this many people will come to your house and read, and they all have to buy the book, and that kind of thing's happening too.
Yeah, Baltimore went through a period like most major cities where the independent bookstore scene kind of dwindled. Fortunately, it's bouncing back a little bit now. But all along, the libraries, and Baltimore has a strong library system, 23 neighborhood branches, and some of my authors have literally done tours of the entire library system, hit all the neighborhoods, depending, again, on the nature of the book. Then my friend, somebody like a Kwame Alexander, who does just scads of school kids with his type of writing. It's just amazing. You see the pictures on Facebook from him, and just an auditorium full of teenagers. It's absolutely amazing. So yeah, when you're thinking about where to read, so consider libraries in addition to bookstores. It doesn't always have to be Borders. Oops, they're not around anymore. It doesn't have to be Barnes & Noble. Oh, they're shrinking.
They're going.
I used to tell that joke with the big six. Oh no, the big five publishers and the big four publishers. And the big one publisher. Consider literary centers often go neglected as being considered. So places like 1455 or CityLit or the Loft in Minneapolis. So look for, or the Writer Center in Bethesda. So look for writing centers, libraries. I just had an author who did a lot of house concerts, house readings, and that's sort of again, stealing ideas from the record industry and the music industry, right? Do it yourself, house concerts, things like that. Be creative, but also given the nature of your book, I mean, you could have, there could be associations that have an affinity for whatever you're writing about. So get yourself on the bill at the next conference, annual conference at whatever association or group. All kinds of ways to be creative. Just to, I often tell the story. I am through with bookstore events that are poorly promoted by the major corporate bookstore chains marketing staff, where it's me and the author and the plate of cookies, and the only thing that's changed by the end of the night is that the plate of cookies is gone. It's embarrassing for me. I feel bad for the author. The author feels bad. The person behind the cash register feels bad. The PR person, if there is one, So I don't know what one. What wrong? We sent the press release to all the places. Yeah. So think outside of the bookstore box, other than independent bookstore box, because they do a great job of drawing crowds. Because they're developing their own community, right? And they know what kinds of books that community likes to talk about. Question in the back.
What projects are good to submit to a literary magazine?
Say that again, please.
What type of projects are good to submit to a literary magazine?
What kind of projects are good to send to a literary magazine?
I would say look at the magazine.
I mean, like, would it be preferred like a short story, or if you're actually trying to write a novel, would you submit an excerpt, or?
Well, some people publish excerpts, I do, but not every magazine does, and every magazine has its own kind of agenda. You can go to a place like duotrope.com where they have a listing of markets, and if you click on the individual names, it'll give you when they're reading and what they're looking for. I mean, it really depends on the magazine.
What's that website?
Duotrope, duotrope.com. And there's another one like that called newpages.com. Between the two, you'll have a listing of most of the markets that there are now.
Thank you.
Sure.
Good question in the back there.
Where do you see audiobooks fitting in for independent publishers?
Where do you see, for audiobooks for independent
Yeah,
publishers?
imagine
Interesting.
potential since Amazon, has such power.
I don't have any experience with that.
There's a book that came out from WordWorks last year by Barbara Unger that just went on audio book. And it was produced by, an indie press or recording studio. I do CDs still, speaking of defunct media. And I'm trying to get to that downloadable online stage, but I'm not a tech head and can't do it. But we still put out collections of spoken word and music, which is a lot of fun and reaches a different audience. So yeah, I mean, that would be great, but most of the indies either don't have the technology or, I mean, you really have to know somebody who can do the mixing.
There is no audiobook of my book, but I have friends and colleagues who've made their own audiobooks, even people who have published with big publishing houses. Mary Kay Zaroblev comes to mind. They make their own audiobooks and get them on Amazon.
That's work.
Yeah.
And don't forget that the audio, when you sign a contract with a publisher, you're not signing a contract for a book. You're signing a contract that deals with your intellectual property as the creator of words in space, in the ether. And then going back to what Paula was saying about retaining your dramatic rights, the contract is going to annotate all the rights: hardback, paperback, audiobook, cinematic rights, theatrical rights,
Call your lawyer.
et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, so if you want to retain those, that's what part of the negotiation process is. But I think audiobooks, as I remember audiobooks on cassette, they kind of dwindled, but then podcasts happened, and everybody, and I think also a trend in America. I know I did it because I commuted to Fairfax from Baltimore for 3 months. People are on the road all the time. All the time. I mean, if we had, we could have done one coming up from Fairfax to Winchester today. I think people are listening to audiobooks, podcasts, that kind of thing, a lot more in higher numbers now because they're easy, accessible, and we're spending a lot of time with our rear ends and driver's seats and car seats, which may not be the best for our health or our sanity, but gives you plenty of time to listen to audiobooks. Oh, what perfect timing. It's 1:30. Thanks for your questions and for your engagement with this issue, and thanks to Paula, Dallas, and Richard. And stay tuned for the next session. Thank you, 1455.